She was certain she'd wiped away every trace of the evidence. She couldn't have been more wrong. Hillary Clinton strode into the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room like she owned the entire place. And honestly, why wouldn't she? She had been walking those corridors for over 30 years. Secretary of State, Senator, presidential nominee, she was arguably the most influential woman in the history of American politics. The marble hallways of the Russell Senate building might as well have been named in her honor. Her legal crew, 4 top-tier lawyers from Williams & Connolly, D.C.'s priciest firm, surrounded her like a Secret Service detail. Dressed in a steel-gray designer pantsuit with her hair perfectly coiffed, she held her chin at that specific angle the cameras always adored. She hadn't just asked for this hearing, she had actually demanded it. The moment FBI Director Kash Patel announced his review of the Crossfire Hurricane documents, Clinton's team saw a chance to go on the attack. Their goal was to blast Patel in public, label him a partisan hack, and seize the narrative before he could get a handle on the evidence. The gallery was absolutely overflowing. Progressive activists were there in force, all wearing matching Protect Democracy shirts. CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times had all dispatched their best political reporters. The stories about Patel's upcoming public shaming were already half-finished on their laptops. Clinton took her place at the witness table and didn't even bother waiting for an introduction. "Mr. Chairman, I'm glad for the opportunity to speak before this committee today," she began. Her voice carried the polished authority she'd perfected over 1,000 press conferences. Because what Director Patel is doing to the FBI is nothing less than a full-scale constitutional crisis. She turned her head to look Patel right in the eye, her eyes locked onto his, with the steady gaze of a woman who had stared down Vladimir Putin at a bargaining table without ever flinching. "You're tearing apart the world's leading law enforcement agency just to settle personal scores. You don't have a single qualification for this job. You were nothing more than a mid-level staffer on Capitol Hill who happened to write a memo. A memo that was completely torn apart by experts from both parties. Yet you somehow talked your way from that into running the entire FBI. That isn't based on talent. That's just pure loyalty." The gallery burst into a wave of applause. A few Democratic senators nodded their heads in total agreement. Everything was playing out exactly as they'd hoped. Clinton leaned in closer, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "You've fired career agents who spent their whole lives trying to keep this country safe. You've cleared out top-level leaders, men and women with years of counterterrorism experience, simply because they were brave enough to look into your boss. You've turned the FBI from the most respected agency on the planet into Donald Trump's private tool for revenge." She let that sink in for a moment before really twisting the knife. "And now you're digging through dusty old files, desperate for anything to justify this crusade against the people who had the guts to do what you wouldn't. Which is following the evidence wherever it goes, no matter the politics involved." She took a beat for dramatic effect, turning her focus toward the cameras. "So, let me make myself crystal clear, Director Patel. I've spent 30 years of my life in public service. I've been investigated, questioned, and scrutinized more than any other public figure in American history. And I was cleared of wrongdoing every single time." She tapped the table with every word to drive the point home. "I am not intimidated by you. I am not scared of what's in your files. And the American people aren't buying this whole act." The progressive wing of the gallery rose for a standing ovation. Supporters were up on their feet, cheering her on. The mainstream reporters were all smiles, looking at one another. This was the version of Clinton they truly adored. Fierce, fearless, and totally in control. The reporter from the Washington Post was already typing out a draft headline. Clinton shreds FBI director in Senate face-off. Kash Patel sat at the other end of the long witness table. He was a bit shorter than most people expected. After seeing him on TV, he wore a dark suit but no tie. He never wore one. He sat there with reading glasses perched on his nose, and a single closed manila folder lay on the table before him. He hadn't looked up a single time during Clinton's entire rant. He was just jotting things down on a legal pad, looking as relaxed as someone writing out a grocery list. When the clapping finally stopped, Patel raised his head. He offered a smile. It wasn't a politician's grin or a smile for the cameras. It was the look of a man who had been waiting for this exact second. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Clinton," he said, his voice sounding remarkably calm after her explosive speech. "You brought up my qualifications, so why don't we talk about those for a second?" He put the cap back on his pen and set it down neatly on his notepad. "I started my career working as a public defender down in Miami. I stood up for people who couldn't afford lawyers, addicts, immigrants, and single moms accused of things they never did. Then I became a federal prosecutor under President Obama, not Trump, but Obama, where I locked up terrorists from Al-Qaeda and ISIS." He took a beat, letting the weight of those words settle in the room. "After that, I took over as chief investigator for the House Intelligence Committee, where I blew the lid off the biggest law enforcement scandal in modern U.S. history. And yes, that Nunes memo, I'm the one who wrote it." He gave the folder a light tap. "Every single word in there has been proven 100% true." Clinton started to speak up, but Patel just held up a finger. He was polite and patient, yet absolutely devastating. "You'll have your chance, ma'am. Right now, it's my turn." He pulled open the manila folder. The committee room, which had been a low hum of whispers, went completely dead. The slow, deliberate way he opened it told everyone that whatever was inside was about to change the game. "You claim I'm just digging through old files," Patel said as he pulled out the first document. "That's funny, because what I found wasn't in any official file. It was tucked away in a locked room at FBI headquarters that was never meant to be seen." He stared right at Clinton. "Room B7034. Ever heard of it?" "Mrs. Clinton." Clinton's face was a mask, but her lead lawyer started looking a little uneasy. "In July 2025, my team found thousands of documents stuffed into burn bags in that very room. These were documents tied to the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Records that were supposed to have been destroyed long ago." He held up a photo for everyone to see. "Take a look at what we found. Burn bags and military-grade disposal bins overflowing with evidence, stacked right to the ceiling. Someone stashed them there. Someone wanted them to disappear." The gallery went silent. Even the people there to support Clinton stopped their murmuring. "And Mrs. Clinton," Patel said, his voice dropping to a low, steady tone, "every single one of these documents points directly back to you." Clinton's confident smile just vanished. The hunter had officially become the hunted. Patel started laying out the papers with the cold, methodical precision of a man who spent his life building cases against terrorists. He didn't rush. A pro never rushes. "Let me show the committee exactly what was inside those burn bags," he began. "This evidence was kept from Congress for nearly 10 years, hidden from the public and kept away from the Durham investigation." He held up the first document, a thick stack of papers stamped with FBI classification marks. "These are internal memos from Crossfire Hurricane, dated 2016. Congress never saw these. They weren't even included in the Durham report. They were just stuffed in burn bags in a secret room. He started reading from the front page. Source Reliability Assessment. Christopher Steele, uncorroborated, primary, subsource, unreliable, recommendation. Do not use for FISA application. Patel looked up from the paper. An FBI analyst wrote those words in September 2016, a full month before they went after the first FISA warrant on Carter Page. The FBI's own people said the Steele dossier was trash, yet someone buried that warning in a burn bag. Clinton's lead attorney leaned in. Director Patel, my client has nothing to do with internal FBI paperwork. Doesn't she? Patel pulled out yet another document. This is the classified annex from the Durham report. It was never made public. We found it in those same burn bags. He began to read aloud. The Clinton campaign came up with and mapped out the Trump-Russia narrative as early as February 2016. A campaign strategy memo from February 2016 mentioned scandalous revelations about Trump's business ties to the Russian mafia. The room started to buzz. Several reporters stopped their typing and looked up, wide-eyed. February 2016, Patel repeated, letting the date sink in. There was no FBI investigation in February 2016. There was zero evidence of Russian collusion back then. No FISA warrants, no informants. There was absolutely nothing. But your campaign was already writing the script. He looked straight at Clinton. You fabricated the Russia hoax, Mrs.
Clinton, before there was ever an investigation or a shred of evidence, you built the story first, then went looking for someone to make it look legitimate. Clinton sat up a bit straighter. Opposition research is just a standard part of any political campaign. Opposition research is legal. Patel nodded. But what you did next definitely wasn't. He produced a financial flowchart, a single page with simple arrows and boxes that anyone could understand.
Your campaign funneled 12.4 liners. Sir Spanput and Tarbedian to the Perkins Coie law firm. Perkins Coie then paid Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS paid Christopher Steele, a former British spy who hadn't been to Russia in years. Steele then put together a dossier full of unverified claims against Donald Trump. He ran his finger along the money trail on the chart. You washed the payments through a law firm so your name would never show up on FEC filings. You logged those payments as legal services, $12.4 million for legal advice. He looked back at the committee. That's the most expensive legal opinion in history. And the truth is, it wasn't a legal opinion at all. It was a political weapon, plain and simple. He held up yet another document for the room to see. The Federal Election Commission actually looked into these payments. Their investigation found that your campaign and the DNC broke federal law by misreporting them. Your campaign was slapped with an $8,000 fine. The DNC was hit with a $15,000 penalty for being dishonest about what that money was actually for. One Democratic senator leaned over to his aide and whispered something under his breath. The aide just shook his head slowly. But the fine isn't the real crime here, Patel continued. The crime is what took place with that dossier after Steele finished putting it together. He produced a timeline chart to illustrate his point. In September 2016, your campaign advisor, Jake Sullivan, who is currently serving as the National Security Advisor, personally gave reporters the rundown on the dossier's claims before the election. He didn't just bring it up in passing. He held private background meetings with journalists from all the major outlets. He personally delivered the narrative that your campaign had spent millions of dollars to manufacture. By October 2016, the FBI was using that dossier as the primary reason to get a FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page, a private American citizen. A FISA warrant is essentially the most powerful surveillance tool the federal government has in its arsenal. It grants the government the power to track every phone call, Every email, every text, and every single financial transaction, everything. And they secured that power based on a document your own campaign funded. Then in January 2017, BuzzFeed went ahead and published the dossier. By that point, your campaign had already spent months planting those stories with journalists all over Washington. That story didn't just break on its own. It was carefully planted, cultivated, and then harvested at the perfect moment. I had no say in what the FBI— You had total control, Patel interrupted, his voice steady but sharp as a razor. He cut her off because the FBI didn't just stumble onto the Steele dossier. Your campaign handed it to them on a silver platter. Your own people walked that document straight into FBI headquarters. And when the FBI's own analyst concluded it wasn't reliable, someone made sure that assessment vanished. He tapped the burn bag document, noting it sat right here in this room for 8 years until he finally tracked it down. The progressive activists watching from the gallery had fallen completely silent. Many were glued to their phones, scanning the live updates with looks of deep concern. But we're not finished with the dossier just yet, Patel said as he pulled out a new stack of papers, because I want to talk about Igor Danchenko. Clinton's expression noticeably tightened. Danchenko was Steele's main subsource, the guy who supposedly provided the intelligence for the dossier. Back in January 2017, the FBI sat down to interview Danchenko. He admitted to them that the dossier was built on, and I'm quoting the FBI's own files here, bar talk, rumors, and pure speculation. Patel held those interview notes high for everyone to see. Just bar talk. The FBI knew as early as January 2017 that this entire dossier, the document used to spy on a citizen, trigger 3 years of probes, and swallow up a whole presidency, was nothing but gossip collected by a man who never even met his sources in person. He placed the notes down gently, noting that they still renewed that FISA warrant 3 more times using that same dossier as their main proof. That makes 4 warrants in total, with every single one requiring an FBI agent to swear under oath that the information was solid. Every single one was a lie. He drew one last document from that section of the folder. This is the actual FBI application for that 4th FISA renewal. An FBI attorney by the name of Kevin Kleinmith was tasked with verifying the evidence. Instead, he went ahead and changed an email to make Carter Page look more guilty. He literally edited the words in a government file just to keep the spying alive. For the first time, Patel's voice turned cold. Kevin Kleinmith ended up pleading guilty to a federal crime. He faked evidence just to keep tabs on an American citizen. And the spying he helped keep going was based on a dossier that your campaign bought, that your staff gave to the FBI, and that the FBI's own analysts called total garbage. 3 Democratic senators got up and walked out of the room. The exit had officially begun. "Should we take a short break, Mrs. Clinton?" Patel asked with a polite smile. "Because next, we need to talk about those 33,000 emails, and those get even more interesting." By the time the committee met again, the Democratic side of the room was looking pretty empty. Clinton came back with yet another lawyer, her 5th, and a bottle of water she still hadn't opened. That earlier confidence she had was gone, replaced by something much more defensive and cold. She had the look of a woman digging in for a long siege. Patel, on the other hand, looked like he'd just started. He took his seat, flipped to a new section in his file, and got right back to work. "Mrs. Clinton, during your time as Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, you handled official government business on a private email server tucked away in your basement in Chappaqua, New York. Is that accurate?" "This whole thing has already been thoroughly investigated," Clinton replied, her voice sounding strained. Director Comey let me off the hook twice. Is that so? Patel reached for a document, explaining that deep inside those burn bags, they found evidence Comey kept hidden from everyone. He displayed a heavy report clearly marked with FBI seals. This here is an internal FBI report from back in 2016. It was put together by the very team tasked with digging through your emails. Let me read you the main takeaway. He began reading with a slow, deliberate pace to make sure every word hit home. The probe into the Clinton email server was intentionally choked off by high-ranking DOJ officials. Major witnesses were handed immunity deals without ever having to testify or hand over physical proof. Anthony Weiner's laptop, which held roughly 340,000 Clinton-related emails, was cleared in a mere 12 days, a timeline that's impossible for a real forensic check, given how much data there was. Patel looked up, repeating 340,000 emails in just 12 days. The first investigation spent a full year on 30,000 emails, yet somehow 340,000 on Weiner's laptop were cleared in under 2 weeks. He placed the paper down on the table. Does that math actually add up to anyone here? Not a sound was heard. But that isn't even the most shocking part. Patel produced a second document. This is an early draft of Director Comey's public statement clearing your name. It's dated May 2nd, 2016. He stopped for a second. Your official FBI interview didn't even happen until July 2nd, 2016. That means Comey wrote his not guilty conclusion 2 months before he even sat down to talk to you. Clinton's lead lawyer jumped up. Director Patel, regarding the timeline of these drafts, I'm not done yet, counselor. Patel's voice was soft, but it commanded the entire room. The lawyer quietly took his seat. In that original draft, Comey wrote that your handling of classified info was grossly negligent. Those are heavy words, Mrs. Clinton, because according to federal law, gross negligence with classified files is a felony. It's a crime that carries a 10-year sentence in federal prison. He held up the two versions side by side. The draft says grossly negligent. The final version released to the public says extremely careless. Same actions, just different wording. One puts you in jail, the other lets you walk. He dropped the papers. Somebody went in and swapped those words. Someone made the call that a presidential candidate wouldn't face felony charges no matter what the evidence showed. And that original draft, the honest assessment, was supposed to be burned. He gestured toward the burn bag. But it wasn't. He pulled out one last document, an FBI memo, and noted it gets even worse. This memo proves that on June 27, 2016, just 5 days before your interview, Attorney General Loretta Lynch had a secret meeting with your husband, Bill Clinton, on a tarmac at Phoenix Sky Harbor. It was a 30-minute sit-down on a private jet. Patel turned his gaze toward the committee. The Attorney General of the United States met privately with the husband of the person under federal investigation just 5 days before the most important interview. Both of them claimed they just talked about their grandkids and a round of golf. He let that ridiculous excuse sink in for everyone. Lynch recused herself after that, but not in any real way. She claimed she'd just go with whatever the FBI recommended, a recommendation that Director Comey had already written 2 months prior. The whole thing was rigged before you even walked into the room. The audience was now completely torn. Clinton's fans went from cheering to a dead silence. The conservative side, while smaller, was starting to get louder, shaking their heads in total disbelief. Let me summarize the whole picture, Patel said. Your husband meets with the Attorney General on a runway. 5 days later, the FBI interviews you on a Saturday of the July 4th weekend, while everyone is on vacation. 2 days after that, Comey reads the statement he wrote 2 months ago, clearing you of everything. And then, that original draft calling you grossly negligent gets hidden away in a bag to be destroyed. He ticked them off on his fingers. The tarmac meeting, the holiday weekend interview, the pre-planned exoneration, and the destroyed evidence. 4 steps. 4 people who decided that the rules didn't apply to you. Clinton's jaw was set so hard you could see the tension in her neck from across the chamber. Her lawyers were scribbling on their pads like crazy, but their faces showed they had no answer for this. Now, let's discuss those 33,000 emails you wiped. Patel went on. In March 2015, you were served a congressional subpoena that legally ordered you to keep every email on that private server. That was a legal order, a binding obligation. He produced a technical report. Between March 25th and March 31st, just days after getting that subpoena, a tech used a tool called BleachBit to wipe 33,000 emails from your server forever. BleachBit doesn't just delete things, it scrubs them so they can never, ever be found again. You claimed those were just personal notes about yoga and your daughter's wedding. But were they? Patel pulled out another paper because the FBI managed to find fragments. Not all of them. BleachBit did its job well, but not well enough. And some of those surviving fragments contained highly classified information. We aren't talking personal emails here. These were government secrets. He held up a photograph for everyone to see. And then there was the matter of the phones. Your own staff used hammers to destroy 13 different mobile devices. Hammers, Mrs. Clinton. They didn't just perform a factory reset. They didn't use secure disposal through the proper government channels. They weren't even turned over to the investigators. Just hammers. They took BlackBerry devices filled with official government data and literally smashed them to bits on a conference table. He paused for a moment to let that image sink in. For those just listening, the scene was vivid enough to see without a picture. I spent 5 years serving as a federal prosecutor. I went after terrorists, drug traffickers, and money launderers. If any government employee, clerk, intern, or mid-level bureaucrat wiped subpoenaed evidence with BleachBit and crushed phones with hammers, they would be facing charges for obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and contempt of Congress. That is a minimum of 3 federal felonies. They would be in handcuffs and behind bars within a week. He turned his gaze toward Clinton. But for some reason, you weren't charged. You weren't even seriously questioned about it because someone decided the rules simply didn't apply to you. Someone decided that Hillary Clinton destroying subpoenaed evidence was somehow different from anyone else doing the exact same thing. He took a brief pause. Except it isn't different. The law is supposed to be the law. Or at least, that's how it's meant to work. A Democratic aide in the gallery quietly folded up his Clinton 2024 button and slipped it into his pocket. The woman sitting next to him noticed and slowly removed her own button as well. But here's what really keeps me up at night, Patel said, his voice dropping low. It's not just the emails themselves. It's about what your foundation was up to while those emails were being sent. Clinton's fifth attorney, the one who had just arrived, began whispering urgently in her ear. Clinton quickly waved her off. "Don't you dare!" Clinton snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. "Don't you even go there." Patel looked at her with an expression bordering on sympathy. "Mrs. Clinton, I have to, because the evidence leaves me no choice." Patel's entire demeanor shifted. The occasional light half-smile in the courtroom vanished. Everything went cold. What replaced it was something the committee hadn't witnessed yet. It was the icy focus of a national security prosecutor who spent years building cases against the world's most dangerous criminals. He noted that the Clinton Foundation brought in over $2 billion in donations between 2001 and 2015. During your tenure as Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, those donations took a massive jump. Foreign governments, corporations, and wealthy individuals funneled hundreds of millions into your family's foundation while you were making decisions that directly impacted them. He pulled out a massive, heavy document. It looked just like a phone book. This is a cross-reference analysis. In the left column, you have the Clinton Foundation donors. In the right column, you have State Department actions that benefited those donors. And right in the center column, you have the timeline. He opened the book to a flagged page. Saudi Arabia gave $10 million to the Clinton Foundation between 2009 and 2012. During that same window, your State Department approved $29 billion in weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. That represents a 97% spike compared to the previous administration. He turned to another section. The government of Qatar donated somewhere between $1 million and $5 million. Boeing put in $1 million. Shortly after, your State Department approved an $8 billion Boeing aircraft deal with Qatar. Onto another page. The Kingdom of Bahrain donated up to $100,000. Your State Department approved arms sales to Bahrain even while they were violently crushing pro-democracy protesters. We're talking tear gas and rubber bullets. Activists were dragged from their homes while you kept the weapons flowing. He turned yet another page. The Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Pinchuk donated up to $25 million right after he was granted access to a State Department program that had previously rejected him. One more page. The government of Algeria donated $500,000 without the required State Department pre-approval. Your team didn't bother to report it. When reporters finally caught on, the foundation simply called it an oversight. He looked up from the table. A $500,000 oversight. He shut the thick book with a thud that echoed through the silent room. I could honestly go on for hours. There are 154 donors listed in this file, but I think the committee sees the pattern. Clinton's lead lawyer stood up once more. These are all just coincidences. Correlation doesn't... Sit down, counselor. I am simply establishing a clear pattern. Patel didn't even have to raise his voice. He didn't need to. The lawyer sat back down. 85 out of the 154 donors who met with you personally at the State Department received favorable government decisions within 90 days of donating to the Clinton Foundation. He let that statistic linger in the air. 85 out of 154. That's a 55% success rate for anyone who donated to your foundation and then asked for a meeting. The State Department doesn't have a 55% approval rate for anything, unless you're paying for access. He paused, letting the math sink in for the listening audience. Just think about that number. If you donated to the Clinton Foundation and requested a sit-down with the Secretary of State, you had better than a coin flip's chance of getting a favorable government ruling. Better than 50-50. It wasn't because your case was strong, it was because your check cleared. Patel pulled a fresh stack of documents from the burn bags. But here is what makes this criminal rather than just suspicious. These are FBI field office reports from 2015 and 2016. FBI's agents in 4 major cities, New York, Los Angeles, Washington, and Little Rock, were actively investigating the Clinton Foundation for public corruption. They had developed confidential informants inside the foundation itself. They had financial records proving the exact timing between donations and decisions. They had testimony from former foundation employees describing the pay-to-play scheme in detail. His voice turned cold. One source told the New York office, And I'm reading straight from the burn bag document that there was an unwritten rule. Big donors got meetings. Meetings led to favorable outcomes. Everyone was in on it. Nobody mentioned it out loud, but everyone knew the score. And then the Obama-Biden Department of Justice shut the whole thing down. He held up a memo. This memo from a senior DOJ official orders FBI leadership to stand down on the Clinton Foundation investigation. The phrase "stand down" appears 3 times. Not pause, not reassess. Stand down. These were FBI agents who had spent months building a solid case. Agents who had risked their entire careers to pursue this investigation were told to just stop. Not because the evidence was weak, but because the timing was politically inconvenient. Patel's jaw tightened. For the first time, something personal flashed across his face. I used to be a federal prosecutor. I built cases brick by brick, the way you're supposed to do it. When you tell a team of dedicated agents to stand down on a case they've worked for months, a case with evidence, sources, and testimony, you aren't just killing an investigation. You're killing their faith in the system. Clinton's face had gone from guarded to ghost white. One of her lawyers was silently shaking her head. The FBI agents pushed back, Patel continued. Multiple agents documented their objections in writing. One agent wrote, and this was in the burn bags too, "We have enough evidence to move forward with a full investigation. The order to stand down isn't based on the evidence, but on political considerations. I am putting this on the record." Patel looked toward the committee. That agent's career was over 6 months later. He was transferred to a field office in the middle of nowhere. His case files were confiscated. His evidence was locked away. He held up another document from the burn bags. Until now, because someone saved that evidence, someone at the FBI who couldn't stomach what was being done. They took the case files, stuffed them in those burn bags, and hid them in room B7034 instead of shredding them. He turned his gaze toward Clinton. Whoever that person was, they just ended your career. Because everything those agents uncovered, the donor cross-references, the timeline analysis, the witness statements, and the financial records, all of it is now in the hands of the United States Department of Justice. The committee room went deathly silent. It wasn't the silence of shock, but the silence of people watching the inevitable finally arrive. Donations go in, Patel said softly. Favorable decisions come out. FBI investigations get killed. Evidence is buried. That's not public service, Mrs. Clinton. That's a criminal enterprise. Clinton glared at Patel with an expression that mixed rage with something she hadn't felt in Washington for 30 years, fear. We haven't even touched on the Epstein connection yet, Patel said, reaching for the thickest section of his folder. But I think the committee needs to understand. I will not, Clinton began to shout, half rising from her chair. Mrs. Clinton, the committee chairman's voice boomed through the room. You will stay seated, and you will allow Director Patel to finish his presentation. This is a Senate hearing, not a campaign rally. Clinton slowly sank back into her chair. Her hands were visibly shaking. Patel paused. He took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly with a cloth from his pocket, and put them back on. It was a subtle move, but it gave the room and Clinton time to realize that whatever came next would be even worse. I'm going to set one line of inquiry aside for now, Patel said carefully, because certain matters are the subject of ongoing federal proceedings that I won't compromise. But the committee needs to grasp how all these scandals are actually connected. He drew a single piece of paper from his file. It's a timeline that begins with your 2009 appointment as Secretary of State and ends in 2025 with my discovery of those burn bags. Then he stood. He hadn't risen even once throughout the entire hearing. That one move captured every gaze in the chamber. From 2009 to 2013, you ran the State Department through a private, unauthorized server. Foreign regimes funneled millions into your family foundation. Arms deals were rubber-stamped, and whenever FBI agents tried to look closer, they were ordered to back off. In 2015, Congress issued a subpoena for your records. Instead, you wiped 33,000 emails. Your own team literally took hammers to their mobile devices. 2016, your campaign dropped over $12 million on the Steele dossier. Your associates then funneled that document straight to the FBI. The Bureau used those claims to spy on American citizens. When a lead analyst flagged the dossier as fake, he was silenced by his superiors. His official report just vanished. Also in 2016, Director Comey wrote your clearance letter 2 full months before you were even questioned. The legal term grossly negligent was softened to extremely careless in the final draft. Then, that initial draft was gone. Between 2016 and 2019, the FBI used that debunked dossier to renew surveillance warrants 4 separate times. A bureau attorney even falsified evidence just to keep those wiretaps alive. By 2019, the Durham probe was finally underway. But the smoking guns had already been stashed in room B7034 inside burn bags. In 2024, the Durham report went public, yet its most explosive section stayed hidden behind a classified stamp. That was the annex detailing how your campaign fabricated the entire Russia narrative. And that very document was what they tried to incinerate. He locked eyes with the committee members. 16 years. 16 long years of evidence being manufactured, concealed, doctored, shredded, and buried. Yet through every single scandal, one person stood right in the middle. One person was the sole beneficiary of every single cover-up. And one person's fingerprints are all over the contents of those burn bags. He pivoted toward Mrs. Clinton. "It was you, ma'am." A heavy silence fell over the gallery. Even the veteran journalists had frozen mid-sentence. Those C-SPAN cameras, usually ignored by everyone, were now capturing the most explosive testimony since the days of Watergate. "These weren't just random events," Patel pressed on. "This was an entire system, a political machine. You constructed a machine designed to turn public service into personal fortune, weaponize our intelligence agencies, and crush anyone brave enough to speak out." He paced slowly back toward his seat. The FBI experts who called out the dossier were silenced immediately. The investigators looking into the foundation were ordered to drop the case. Members of Congress who sought answers were publicly branded as lunatics. Reporters who dared to dig were blacklisted and ignored. You didn't just ignore the rules, Mrs. Clinton. You broke the very people sworn to uphold them. He lifted the photo of the burn bags for one final look. Those bags are the last remains of the conscience of FBI insiders who saw the truth but were powerless to act. Whistleblowing was simply not an option for them. Doing so would have ended their careers instantly. Going to the press wasn't an alternative either. They would have faced federal prison for mishandling secrets. So, they took the only path they had left. They saved the proof and hoped that one day someone like me would find it. He placed the picture back on the table with quiet respect. Someone in that agency, a person I might never even meet, looked at those files and made a choice. They decided that facts mattered more than their job, their retirement, or even their own well-being. They stuffed the evidence into bags, moved it to a secure room, locked that door, and walked away with a glimmer of hope. His tone softened until it was almost a whisper. The chamber was so deathly silent you could hear the faint buzz of the AC. My parents arrived here from India with absolutely nothing to their name. My dad worked as a cab driver in the streets of New York. My mom spent her days working in a retail shop. They were total strangers in a new land. They didn't have powerful friends or political ties. And they certainly didn't have a foundation collecting checks from foreign powers. A handful of people in the audience let out a nervous smile. But they possessed one vital thing. They held on to the core American belief that no one stands above the law. Not the wealthy, not the elite, and not the politically connected. They instilled that value in me every single day, morning and night. He gripped the folder and raised it high. This evidence proves that for 16 years, you acted like the rules didn't apply to you. And for 16 years, you actually got away with it. The entire system was your shield. The Department of Justice looked the other way. The top brass at the FBI had your back. Even the press served as your defense team. He lowered the folder back to the desk. But that era is officially finished. It's not because of anything I did. It's because of the hero who saved those burn bags from the fire. It's because of the agents who filed their reports even when they were told to shut up. It's because of the analysts who spoke the truth even as it was being buried, proving that there are still people in this country who believe in facts. Today, the truth finally prevailed. The silence that followed was the heaviest that room had ever felt. Clinton took one last shot. Ignoring her lawyer's frantic whispers, she stood up and pointed a finger directly at Patel. "This is nothing but a political hit job," she declared, her voice trembling but still holding the grit of a veteran of DC's political wars. "You're just a Trump loyalist on a personal mission. Every single document you've pulled is cherry-picked, stripped of context, and served up by a man who built his career on conspiracy theories about me." She turned her gaze toward the cameras. "I've been under the Republican microscope for 30 years. Benghazi, emails, the foundation, Whitewater, all cleared. And now this partisan hack expects Americans to believe he's magically found the truth that dozens of other probes missed." Her voice regained its strength. The Clinton of old was making one final stand. This isn't about facts. It's about raw power. This is a president using his hand-picked FBI director to hunt down a political rival. If this is allowed to stand, no American is safe from the government's crosshairs. It was, by any standard, a powerful closing. 3 months ago, it might have actually worked. But Patel didn't even blink. "Mrs. Clinton, I prosecuted terrorists during the Obama administration. I've represented the poor when they couldn't afford a lawyer. I was a public defender long before I became a prosecutor. My life has been spent in courtrooms, not on cable news. I don't care about political parties. I care about the evidence." He motioned toward the massive pile of paperwork on the desk. "You call this cherry-picked? There are more than 4,000 pages of proof inside those burn bags. This committee is going to receive every single one of them. Every page, every memo, and every finding that was kept from the American people." He looked at her with an expression that wasn't spite or victory. It looked more like pure exhaustion, the exhaustion of a man who had spent years hunting a truth that the world insisted wasn't there. "You had 30 years, to be honest," he said softly. 30 years to admit you made mistakes, to admit you cut corners, that you let the power get to your head. The American people are a forgiving bunch, Mrs. Clinton. They would have understood, but you never came clean. Instead, you went after anyone who dared to ask questions. You called them conspiracy theorists. You called them sexist. You called them deplorable. That word lingered in the air, her own label coming back to haunt her from a decade prior. The people you questioned were just FBI agents doing their jobs. They were investigators following the trail and journalists asking the hard questions, and you tried to destroy every last one of them. Right then, the committee chairman cleared his throat. I have a statement to enter into the record. Every eye in the room shifted. The chairman adjusted his glasses and lifted a letter. This morning, Senator Charles Grassley, President pro tempore of the Senate, sent criminal referrals to the DOJ regarding the following matters. Obstruction of justice concerning the destruction of subpoenaed email records. Public corruption involving the Clinton Foundation during Mrs. Clinton's time as Secretary of State, and a conspiracy to defraud the U.S. regarding the creation of the Steele dossier to trigger federal surveillance on American citizens. The room went wild. Flashbulbs went off everywhere. Reporters bolted for the doors to break the news. Democratic aides were glued to their phones, faces turning pale. Clinton's lawyers were up and shouting, though their protests were drowned out by the noise. Clinton herself sat perfectly still, staring at Patel with a face that had finally lost all its composure. It wasn't anger or defiance, but recognition. The recognition of a woman who had played the game at the highest level for 3 decades and had finally, definitively lost. Furthermore, the chairman yelled over the din, this committee will launch a formal probe into the suppression of evidence at FBI headquarters, specifically why documents were hidden in burn bags inside room B7034. One by one, the pieces began to fall. Within minutes, a Democratic senator issued a statement. These are grave allegations that require a full investigation. No one is above the law. Then came another and another. The wording was careful and legalistic, but the point was clear. They were letting her go. Patel started packing up his files with a calm, steady hand. He did it with the same precision he used when he arrived. He tucked each exhibit back into its folder, lined them up, and clicked his case shut. At the other end of the table, Clinton's lead attorney finally managed to get things under control. Our team reserves all rights and will answer these wild claims through the proper legal channels. That works for me, Patel said, not even looking up from his bags. The evidence isn't going anywhere. Suddenly, every phone in the room buzzed with an alert at the exact same time. One reporter glanced at his screen, and the color drained from his face. He leaned over to the guy next to him. CNN just broke the story. They've got the master list of all the donors. Someone leaked the whole thing. In an instant, the hearing room turned into a total madhouse. Journalists were sprinting for the exits. Staffers were frantically yelling into their phones. The calculated explosion Patel set off in that room was now tearing through the outside world in real time. Alert after alert kept popping up. The Associated Press just confirmed the criminal charges. Reuters snagged a quote from an ex-Foundation staffer that backs up the bribery claims. The BBC was already broadcasting the news across the globe. One of the few Democratic senators who stayed for the entire hearing stood up to address the room. I've worked alongside Mrs. Clinton for many years. I've defended her plenty of times, but the proof we saw today requires a real, outside investigation. I simply can't look the other way after what we just witnessed. He stared straight at Clinton. I'm sorry, Hillary, but this matters more than being loyal. Clinton just watched him. That knife in the back hurt far more than anything Patel had thrown at her. This was a real friend and a true ally. And he was jumping ship. Patel finished packing his things and got to his feet. He paused to lock eyes with Clinton one final time. "Mrs. Clinton, I need you to get one thing straight. This isn't about you and me. I don't have any ill will toward you. I'm not out to get you. I have a job to do. My task is to chase the facts wherever they lead." For 8 long years, this proof was locked in a room that no one was ever supposed to find. He grabbed his file. But someone found it. He gave the chairman a nod, turned around, and headed for the door. The place was still an absolute mess. Reporters were screaming questions, lawyers were bickering, and senators were whispering in tight circles. Through it all, Patel walked with the steady peace of a man who had finished his mission. Exactly that, and nothing else. Behind him, Hillary Clinton was left sitting all by herself at the table. Her legal team was already clearing out. Her supporters had already vanished. The news cameras were already pivoting away from her to follow Patel out the door. The Queen was stuck on her throne, and the whole thing was going up in flames. They wrapped up the hearing at 4:47 in the afternoon. By 5 o'clock, every major news channel had cut their regular shows. CNN's headline read, "Clinton hit with criminal charges after brutal Senate hearing." Fox News went big on the burn bags, saying Patel finally unmasked 16 years of secrets. Even MSNBC, after a frantic hour of talk, had to admit the FBI's evidence raised some massive red flags. That night, Clinton's lawyers put out an official statement. They called the hearing a political stunt run by a Trump loyalist who's always had an axe to grind. Mrs. Clinton says none of it is true and plans to clear her name in court. But the statement didn't convince a single soul. Just a few hours later, 3 of her former staff members refused to say a word about the case. In D.C., that's just code for, "I'm getting my own lawyer." A 4th staffer was even more direct when talking to Politico off the record. "The game is up. Everyone knows it's over. Now we just wait to see who else gets dragged down with her." The Clinton Foundation announced they were stopping all donations while they looked into things themselves. People who gave money started asking for it back. Members of the board started quitting. The organization that used to host world leaders and pull in billions was folding like a cheap tent. An ex-DNC chair told the AP that the whole situation was a total disaster. If you were even close to that foundation, you better find a lawyer fast. The story about those burn bags stayed on every channel for weeks. Legal experts tore the evidence apart on TV, podcasts, and all over YouTube. Former FBI agents, the ones who were silenced years ago, finally started talking, first cautiously, then with pure anger. One retired agent went on a local station in Little Rock to tell his story. "The proof was right there. We had all we needed to close the case. We had the witnesses, the files, and the money trail, but they forced us to quit. They buried the whole thing just to keep her safe." Do you ever wonder what it's like to swear an oath to the law, only to have your superiors tell you that the rules don't apply to everyone? A fellow retired agent from the New York field office recently published an op-ed that exploded across the internet. For 8 long years, I lived with the crushing knowledge that proof of government corruption was being buried. I was forced into silence. I was powerless to intervene. My only option was to hold on to hope. Today, that hope was finally justified. Criminal referrals are now tearing through the Department of Justice at a lightning-fast pace. Within just 30 days, a special counsel was officially named. He's a retired federal judge with 0 political ties and a legendary commitment to detail that some call obsessive. Up on Capitol Hill, the Senate Intelligence Committee began dumping the burn bag documents in massive waves of several hundred pages. Every single drop brings fresh headlines, shocking new discoveries, and more political fallout. The document tracing the links between Clinton Foundation donors and State Department policy quickly became the most downloaded government file since the 9/11 Commission report. Kash Patel sat down for exactly one interview. Only one. He didn't go to the big networks like CNN or Fox, despite hundreds of media outlets practically begging for his time. Instead, he spoke to a local station in New York, right near his childhood home in Garden City. He just sat there in a plain, ordinary chair. There was no fancy backdrop, no professional makeup, and no crew behind the scenes. It was just one man and a single camera lens. "I take no joy in what took place today," he began. He continued, "Some people might view this as a victory lap, but it's not that at all. There is nothing fun about exposing deep-rooted corruption. When you look at these documents, you're seeing evidence of genuine institutional failure. These are the very institutions that were built to safeguard the American public. We expected the FBI to remain completely independent. We expected the DOJ to simply follow wherever the evidence led. The State Department's duty was to the people, not to a list of wealthy private donors. Instead, those pillars of our government crumbled, and that is certainly nothing to cheer about." When the interviewer brought up the burn bags, the conversation shifted. "How exactly did you stumble upon them?" they asked. "We were just conducting a standard security audit of FBI properties," Patel explained. "We checked every single room, every closet, and every square inch of storage. We came across room B7034, which was on the books as a basic storage space. The door had been bolted shut for years, but when my team cracked it open, they found the burn bags, thousands of pages stacked all the way to the ceiling." He leaned in closer. "When you see something like that, your gut reaction is pure shock," he said. "Then that shock turns into real anger. But as you start reading, it hits you. Someone brave inside the FBI saved these files on purpose. These documents were flagged for destruction, yet someone chose to keep them. Someone put their career and their very freedom on the line just to ensure the truth didn't die." He took a brief pause. "I have no idea who that person is," he admitted. "In fact, I might never find out. But whoever they are, they're the true hero here, not me. All I did was turn the key. They are the ones who made sure there was a story left to tell." When asked what comes next, Patel fell silent for a long moment, lost in thought. Through the window, the sun dipped below the horizon of the city, where his parents first arrived with nothing but 2 suitcases and a dream. "My parents immigrated here from India," he shared. "My father spent 60 or 70 hours a week behind the wheel of a taxi. My mother balanced 2 jobs, working from sunrise until late at night. They never uttered a single complaint because they knew they were building a future, not just for our family, but for this country." He locked eyes with the camera lens. "They told me the exact same thing every single day. In America, the law is the law. It doesn't matter your name or your status. It doesn't matter how much wealth you've accumulated. It doesn't matter who you know in high places. The law is simply the law." His voice remained calm, but you could see the exhaustion of the day etched in his expression. "I believed them back then. I still believe them now, and today, I finally proved them right." With that, the interview wrapped up. Patel stood up, gave a nod of thanks to the small crew, and stepped out into the night air. The streets of Garden City were peaceful and still. These were the same roads where his father once drove his cab, chatting with strangers and building a life, one fare at a time. This was the same neighborhood where his mother would walk to her second shift at 6 o'clock p.m., exhausted but never letting it show. These were the very blocks where a young Cash played basketball and dreamed of practicing law. All because his parents promised him that in America, lawyers made sure everyone played fair. Up and down the street, American flags hung from front porches, just like they always had. You could see them at the hardware store, the local barber shop, and the post office. They were just simple, everyday flags, not for rallies or shows, but the kind people put up because they truly believe in what they represent. Patel walked back to his car all by himself. There was no entourage or security team following him, as he'd already sent them home for the night. He was just a man with a folder, walking down a quiet American street as the sun went down. Finally, the full weight of the day began to settle on his shoulders. Somewhere in D.C., Hillary Clinton was meeting with her lawyers, mapping out a defense for crimes she spent 16 years thinking she'd never answer for. In a quiet FBI field office, a retired agent watched the hearing replay with tears in his eyes, finally seeing the evidence he was once ordered to forget shown to the world. And in a place known to no one, the person who had salvaged those burn bags was watching as well. Anonymous. Unknown. The most courageous figure in this story, someone who would never get the credit or the thanks they deserved. Just watching as the truth they had protected was finally set free. The burn bags had been ripped open. The truth was finally out. And for the first time in ages, accountability had actually come to Washington. The evidence had spoken, and it was absolutely devastating.